So for those of you who I haven't met before, my name is Jennifer Goodman, originally from the UK, as you can tell by the accent, but I've been at Audencia Business School now for just over 4 years, and I've participated in several of the CR3 plus events in different locations. So I was in Finland before arriving in France. I was able to join when Henken was hosting there. Céline, also, just to apologise because they've just started doing some building work just outside my door. I hope that won't be too disruptive. I will mute as much as possible. Okay, so we have about 2 hours together. We have about 2 hours together this afternoon. So the plan is with our 5 papers, we'll have about 8 minutes or so presentation and 10 minutes for questions and discussion. Please feel free to chip in with questions and comments, constructive ideas for all of the papers that we'll hear from this afternoon. 2 hours is quite a while to be sitting, so I propose maybe to take a 5-minute comfort break or so after maybe the 3rd paper, if that works with everybody. Check in again before we get there to make sure that's okay, and then a short break before we move on to the panel session which follows this one. So let me stop talking and hand over to the first presenter. So that's going to be Asaf Chesner. Asaf, do you have your slides ready to share your screen?
Thanks, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. Let's see how it goes. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, it's just settling. There we go. That's perfect. Great.
Good. Great. And you can hear me well, yeah?
That's perfect. Yeah. Whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, everyone, for the invitation to share with you. My name is Asaf, and I'm a student at Latrobe University in Australia, calling in from California. So it's 4:30 a.m., but I'm excited to be with everyone. And the topic I chose to base my research on is managing a sustainable, age-diverse working environment. And one of the things that kind of inspired my curiosity was I was turning 39, and I was also reading a book by David Sinclair about lifespan and why we age and why we don't have to, basically challenging all the assumptions around age and aging and how it can be cured in all kinds of different ways. And then I also reflected on, how can that relate to what I'm learning and just business and organizations and society in general. So we will cover in this short presentation 4 main topics. One is the background for the research, an aging workforce, the key concepts and so on. The second one is ageism, stereotypes that all people are facing. And the third one is the unique advantages and challenges of managing an older workforce and the age diverse workforce. And the fourth one would be more practical implications to sustainably manage such a diverse organization. When we look at the aging workforce, many of us are aware that older people are living longer and working longer, and there are less younger people entering the workforce. And it's predicted that by 2050, more than 4 in 10 individuals will be older. And that's compared to 1 in 3 today. So that's quite a change and direction we are heading to. The theoretical framework I used for the literature review, it was based on different frameworks and key concepts, and combining into one framework, looking first on the existence of age diversity in an organization, how it can be sustainably managed. And in that case, sustainable means creating an inclusive, equal and diverse organization, okay? And by doing so, what are the advantages that can be gained, and which challenges need to be addressed. And also a specific highlight on sustained productivity as part of that. The term ageism was coined by Butler in '69, and I found it very pointedly when I started the research, and I'll just read that part. This quote, he describes it as deep-seated uneasiness on the part of the young and middle-aged, a personal revulsion to and distaste for growing old, disease, disability, and fear of powerlessness, uselessness, and death. And the way I got it, where it's kind of touched me, is actually the fear of our own mortality. And yeah, so that's the basis of it. And then when we dive more specifically into the different stereotypes faced by older workers, we can see that there are two coins, or two sides of the coin. The negative side, they are seen as with lower competency, maybe less flexible due to being used to their old ways of doing things, reduced ambition and motivation, and they incur higher costs due to their seniority. On the flip side of the coin, there are also positive stereotypes. Older people are seen as reliable, loyal, have better social skills and higher commitment. And the interesting thing is not just external stereotypes, but what happens often, and that's suggested by research, is that all of these are being internalized by the older workers, and thus it limits their own advancement of knowledge and position in the jobs as well, due to this internalized oppression. When the advantages and challenges of managing an aging workforce and an age-diverse workforce, the research brings forth a few key points, and we look at some of them. For example, better knowledge sharing due to different age cohorts. Younger people can share with older people different knowledge, while they can share their experiences of being in the work or organization for a long time. There is increased motivation and engagement, mitigating the talent shortfall by having reduced turnover, and indeed there is a highlight on increased productivity as well. And in terms of the challenges, there might be generational conflicts due to perceived ideas of differences, and the actual management of different age groups requires just a different set of criteria and ways of dealing with different expectations and so on. And also looking at the common norms and policies and how these can be changed might be a challenge in itself. And what does it mean to organizations in a practical way as well? It means that numbers show that there is indeed increased productivity when there are older workers in the organization, like we can see here. And also there's those age 55 and higher show higher engagement compared to those who are 45 and less, which is around 60% or less than that. However, there's also many older people share about denied work opportunities due to their age. We can see here 67%. That's from an Australian survey. And very importantly to notice that only 10% of the organizations in a survey said that they are very ready to manage such a diverse workforce. Okay. So there's not real readiness for that kind of shift in the organizational landscape. And practical implications of how to sustainably manage and effectively manage such a diverse workforce. we look at 4 different components, and one is culture, really encouraging inclusivity through healthy contact between different age groups, encouraging communication, providing specific training, and also the example of management is key to the acceptance and creation of an inclusive culture. And then flexible work, which is also very relevant to the COVID times, to support specific life cycles commitment. For example, an older worker might want to take care of a loved one or other family members, and how can the work support that rather than deny it and make them maybe leave earlier due to this rigid set of criteria for working. And retirement, the research suggests, move beyond fixed retirement to other forms of retirement, such as phased retirement or bridge employment, like bringing in older workers who retired already and let them support new workers, younger ones, in mentorship or project management and so on. And the last one, the 4th one, in terms of human resource management, implement diversity and inclusion, but back it up by policy. For example, one example of an age-friendly policy would be age-neutral recruiting, or as such. So these are the key practical implications that were found. And yeah, what I found really interesting is to see that, yes, it's a practical imperative for organizations today to be sustainable, but also it touches on a personal note and a societal one, to see which kind of society we want to create, one that is inclusive, caring for everyone, and supports the productivity of all that want to take part in that way. So yeah, thank you everyone for listening and being here.
Thanks, Asaf. Thanks for the presentation. Great. And a really nice topic. I think this topic of the aging population is really a key issue, something that we don't often talk about or hear about, but yet is becoming super relevant in terms of the shifts that are going to be a response to the shifts in population, economic, social, whatever that may be. So a great timely topic and an important one to start getting our teeth into. So thanks, Asaf, for that. Maybe any initial questions? Anybody want to kick off with any comments or questions related to Asaf's presentation? And welcome, Céline, who's here joining us. Any initial questions or comments? Right, if not, I can maybe kick off with one. So it was quite interesting to see that you look at the productivity related to the sort of the older generation in order to maintain this productivity. I'm wondering, because you were talking about what kind of society do we want to live in, wondering why productivity seems to be the main focus of what you're exploring. Is that the main, is that the kind of outcome that we're searching for? Would there be other alternatives, perhaps?
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Jennifer. That was the initial kind of filter to look through as I wanted to focus the research, but there were other advantages as well that came along the way. So, but in terms of the productivity, seeing the output of all the workers, it was quite surprising based on the stereotypes that many of us maybe have, or that research shows that older workers are not really productive or don't have the strength or mental capacity to do so. And it's quite the contrary in many levels, to see that actually they add to the productivity of an organization. And that was a surprising finding that I wanted to highlight, to challenge those stereotypes and common beliefs about what's what's actually going on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm wondering if there might also be some extra steps along the way, right? So maybe by having a mix of these different ages and a diversity within the company, that leads to perhaps a certain type of company culture, which then, so that there's several steps between this attitude or this inclusiveness and then some kind of performance measure.
Yeah. And also, like you said, the age diverse workforce, bringing in different age groups, does enrich the culture and allows for increased productivity and the knowledge sharing that supports everyone in that case. So it's what older people bring, but also managing that in an age diverse workforce in a sustainable way.
Hi, everybody. I'm just coming in, and sorry for being late.
Hello, Céline.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Asaf. I want just on this point on productivity. I mean, that's an interesting point. I was wondering, if we want to go with productivity, also question this notion of, could it be a way to question this notion of productivity?
What do you mean?
Do we need to have this productivity principle productivity lens? Do we need it? Do we need to rethink? Because with productivity, well, I guess it's different, but I'm linking it with efficiency, which is maybe different. So that's two different concepts. And do we, in our organizations, do we need to question them? Do we need to have productive organizations, I suppose, but do we need to have efficient organizations? I don't know if I'm clear on them. It's not really a question.
Can I step in? A couple of years ago, there was a very nice article in the New York Times that was actually saying what you're saying, Céline, and the title of the article was, "We need to be less productive." So, and the thesis was that if we want work to be existentially meaningful to people, and if we want people to be more inventive and creative at their work, so we need to question the imperative. I think this is what the word that you were looking for, the imperative of productivity when it becomes the only unit of measurement of one's usefulness for an organization. So, and then of course is directly related to this question of ageism that was discussed, because there is a sudden stigmatization of age, but it's not only of age. You have an intersectional stigmatization here, because women at a certain age, for example, specific people that belong to minority groups, etc. So they're all being stigmatized because they're being seen as potentially less productive. So they will get pregnant, they'll have children, etc., etc. So, and I think this is a very important question in this particular, if we frame it in this particular way. So, what do you think, Asaf?
Yeah,
sorry for
no, thank you for opening it up. I think it's a really interesting concept to look at actual productivity as a measure. And just Yuliya, to what you, I hope I pronounce your name correctly, for what you said, one of the things I added in the actual paper was also, it would be really interesting to apply the theoretical framework also to a more specific group, not just older people, but older women in the workforce, or minorities, different ethnical backgrounds, and so that can be for further research to take it on. Because my research was more just generally older people, but of course there are other marginalized groups that can be greatly impacted by that kind of stereotypes.
Thank you.
Maybe we need to actually redefine productivity. Take it one step further. What is productivity and what does it mean for organizations and society? Is it economic? Is it always related back to some kind of economic growth, or is it something else? Can productivity actually mean just meaningful work or meaningful output, not a measure of something that needs to go like this in an organization necessarily?
Thanks, Jed.
Asaf, I'm kind of interested in, when you were talking about stereotypes, in your research, is there anything regarding a correlation of sorts between how empathetic someone might be and the stereotypes that they perceive? So does empathy come into this equation at all, do you think? Is there anything came up with that?
Can you give an example? Because I'm not sure if it came up directly from what I researched.
Yeah,
but
sure.
It sounds like it makes sense.
Yeah, look, with the stereotypes, and I'm just trying to rewind to what they were. But if, for example, a person is more empathetic to the aging population, to seeing their challenges and what they need from a truly empathetic perspective, does that alter the stereotypes that are bestowed upon the age population?
Yeah, I assume so, but I'm not sure in terms of the research I was exposed to. But part of the solution, so to speak, or sustainable management is like giving the opportunities for different age groups to come together, encourage this healthy communication to dissolve or combat those stereotypes and actually seeing people for who they are. And while, of course, acknowledging the differences, but connecting on that level is seen to be supportive for creating a more coherent environment and friendly, age-friendly environment. Didn't answer your question directly, but just wanted to bring it back to, what I did find.
Maybe I just thought of something, just a comment, but I think your work, Asaf, made me think about this propositions of working less, right? The Finland's prime minister, for example, who proposed to work 6 hours a day, if I remember, or 4 days a week. But this proposal is not apparently, it's not that very easy to pass. So we don't know if one day it's going to happen, but I believe it's something that we should all think about, right? Being less productive would also mean being willing to work less, and organizations for this would also have to cope with being less competitive. So it would demand a whole change of paradigm related to the one we have today. So yeah, just made me think of this comment.
Yeah, thanks, Camilla.
Yeah, absolutely, Camilla. Like different types of kind of quality within an employee's work life and within the work community, rather than just this sort of performance-based economic drive. Yeah, interesting. I was also wondering if you'd had a look at the literature related to the kind of different skills that we tend to demonstrate and abilities through a lifetime. So I know that there's some work done on sort of cognitive abilities, and as you become older, you're more adapted to perhaps certain different tasks. So then how careers can evolve to actually make the most of that and bring that out to bring the best out of all the employees at their different stages. Have you had a look into any of that literature?
Yeah, it's something I need to look at, but there was a separation between, or a difference between soft skills and hard skills, and how different age groups work with that. But it's something I need to look in order to answer more specifically. Yeah.
Yeah, the paper I'm thinking of, I read it quite a while ago. The name escapes me, but I know that they kind of break down these to quite specific sort of skills and capabilities according to age, and how that shifts or can shift with age. So that could be an interesting way to go as well.
Yeah, and there was a case study that I looked at, I think it was even BMW, some kind of a car company, and how by changing the design of the workplace to fit and be more healthy, for all the workers. They were able to do much more and were more engaged, more happy and satisfied, and in this case more productive as well. But there was also making those changes in order to support people rather than assuming that everyone has need to have the same conditions. So yeah, that was quite an interesting one. And simple, didn't require much from the company itself.
Okay, so just thinking maybe about the next steps of the paper, where do you want to go with this? Is this staying as a literature review conceptual paper, or do you want to go towards empirical data?
Looking at Jed, because we were speaking about what will be most supportive. So Jed, do you have any suggestions?
I'm not sure that Asaf wants to head into the realm of doing a full master's thesis or a PhD, but I think that this conceptual paper may have some opportunities to support an industry-based magazine, such as we have Australian Human Resource Institute. They have a magazine similar in the US and the UK, similar style of organisations. I think it's more of it will lend itself in the end to a more practical outcomes based paper where could provide human resource practitioners some insights into what they might like to explore within organisations. So I thought it might position within that realm. And Jennifer, taking on your idea around the skills and the cognitive abilities, I think that might be something that Asaf and I can investigate and bring that into it. The other paper that I have read recently, and we utilise this in the MBA, is the Deloitte study that they do of over 38,000 organisations globally around workforce trends. It has highlighted that there's this contractual shift between employer and employee to an employee experience. So it is shifting some of that language away from productivity to employees wanting to stay with organisations where there is meaning, where there is growth and potential for their whole life cycle. So it'd be interesting to see whether they've also got some data around what does that employee experience mean for older workers in this case, or a diverse workforce. We're looking at both of them. Does that sound about where you want to position the paper, Asaf? If I just put words into your mouth?
No, it's perfect. Yeah, thank you.
I mean, I just want to add, it's a very interesting topic, and it would be great to have empirical data to do more. So it's not a literature I know, but I feel it's a very, very relevant one, and it would be very worth to go further and collect data and to enter also this discussion around diversity, which maybe is not yet there. I don't know. Again, I'm not sure, but just to encourage you to continue.
Thanks.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'd say just also to sort of close up, Céline and I also do a project with our students where we encourage them to go and talk to a senior, find out a little bit more about, what's missing, what they need, what would make life a bit better. And I think it's quite an interesting activity because especially so young students or just starting university or graduating university, it's the last thing that they perhaps have in mind. But I think it's a really interesting topic and great to raise that kind of conversation among all age groups, not just among seniors, but also among young students as well. So well done, Asaf, great job. Thank you very much for your presentation and for the paper.
Cheers. Thank you everyone for your great questions and comments.
Okay, so moving swiftly on, the second paper is the bioconstruction paper. Ariadne, is that you?
That's me. Hi,
Great.
guys. So,
hi, welcome.
Jennifer, I just wanted to tell you everybody something. We are both here, Yuliya and I, I think Yuliya will have to leave in, I think, half an hour, right?
Yeah, unfortunately,
so, I don't know if it's possible to exchange the order or if it's a problem to Ariadne, or I don't know, but if you could, I think it would be great. But it's so possible to you, Ariadne? I will stay until the end, but
there's no problem with me. I can do the next
so much.
Okay. If it's okay with Ariadne, that's great with us. Okay.
Thank you so much, Ariadne. so maybe can we present now so that Yuliya can also collaborate, and then we have Ariadne. Okay, so I will share my. Thank you so much, by the way. So I will share my screen so that we can present. Sorry, are you seeing the screen?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, I'll try to make it bigger. So okay, so hopefully you're seeing it. So so our paper is so it's a paper that we started in 2019, back to more than 2 years ago, and it's about a feminist community that Yuliya identified in São Paulo in Brazil. And I had the chance to be there to make a study there. And now in the end of this year, we're gonna go back there to collect more data. So just as a background. So Yuliya, would you like to talk in the first slides or?
Sure. Well, probably something that we should have to mention that the title of the paper has already changed.
Yes.
And this is not the most recent version, but I think you will still be able to get the key ideas. So the project was in a way inspired by trying to understand alternative forms of organizing. So especially when we talk about the non-Western context, when we talk about the people being pushed to the margins and dealing with a number of complex problems, at the same time being completely abandoned and considered to be outside of this area of intervention by the state. So we were interested in understanding how what kind of resistant practices arise from this predicament. And right now you have already appearing literature that talks about alternative organizing in relation to what they call survivalist communities. So people living beyond the abyssal line, excluded beyond the abyssal line. So there's a very important sociologist from Portugal that introduced this term, and he says when we talk about injustice or social injustice, this is one of the equality is one of the sustainable goals of the United Nations. It's very important to contextualize and to understand that, for example, experience of being excluded in a Western country such as France or such as the United States is very different from the experience of being excluded in a country like Brazil or in a country like Congo.
England.
Or yeah, no. So and he calls it, so you have this below and below the abyssal line exclusions that we have to look at and understand what forms of alternative organizing emerge in these survivalist communities. We can go to the next slide, Camilla.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So the immediate, of course, if we want to concretize it, and if we want to talk about survivalist communities by giving them the name that is known in outside the academic circles, we're of course talking about the slums population, people living beyond the abyssal line. Here we have some statistics. If we look at the so-called developed world, we have 6% of city population of developed countries living at what are considered to be slums, but the rest of the world, we're talking about the figure that is closer, and right now it's increasing to 80%. So this also, of course, when we talk about these populations, reveals a picture of what I already mentioned, this intersectional oppressions, that many of these, many of the groups that constitute these populations, so many of them are women and different types of minorities, religious minorities, sexual minorities, etc. So, and when some intervention programs are being designed in order to improve their condition, very often you see this is a top-down approach using a very generic policies and very general understanding of how people end up living in the favelas, etc. And what is missing is understanding how these survivalist communities can actually develop their own agency and can basically help themselves. So not only how can they survive, but also how through alternative forms of organizing, they can become recognized political actors and political communities in the respective countries. So maybe Camilla can talk more about the Brazilian context.
Yes, so maybe this is a picture that we chose to put here in the presentation, since it shows the shocking inequality that we have in a country like Brazil, and social spatial inequality as well. As you see a favela on the left, and on the right, one of the wealthiest neighbors in São Paulo. This is not the community we studied, but it shows how shocking it can be. This is a picture from The Guardian 4 years ago. The purpose of our study was to highlight the importance of these forms that Yuliya mentioned of empowerment and emerging forms of civil disobedience in a way, and community mobilization. From people themselves in the communities and not dependent on these top-down decisions. So we decided to investigate this such site of resistance, this feminist favela that we call this feminist community in which women have let's say a leadership position in São Paulo, Brazil, and which are the practices of communion and coalitional fomentation there.
Maybe I just have to add something. How I came across the case of Feminist Favela in São Paulo. There was an article that was run in philosophy magazines in France, and they say, this is absolutely amazing. So you have this community, it's mostly run by women. Nobody is hungry there. Children go to school. There are some educational facilities. They receive zero help from the state, but they also have one of the lowest violence rates there, if you compare it with the rest of the favelas in Brazil, etc., and some other places. Because, you know, favelas sounds as stigmatized places. You immediately think of kind of a state of ultimate abandonment. And here you have a case of the favela that is somehow self-sufficient, that does not only survive, but actually can support its community members. And you have this unprecedented solidarity that can deal with the chronic problems of the countries such as Brazil, which is, for example, the problems of violence. How does it happen? Where the police cannot solve the problem, the government cannot solve the problem, and here you have this example. And this was quite intriguing.
And one of the things also that called our attention is that in the article of this French magazine, they were discussing about a different feminism that we see. So it's not the feminism that we see in the Western context, but it's a kind of decolonial feminism, a feminism that takes into account other dimensions that, for example, a country which has been colonized, the race dimensions, and other dimensions which not only men, women, let's say inequalities. So we in the paper decided to draw from Lugones, who is a decolonial feminist who wrote many articles about this colonial difference, and de Souza Santos, so the Portuguese sociologist Yuliya mentioned at the beginning, who let's say developed the epistemologies of the South, and this is what it's composes of theoretical positioning. So we drew from Lugones, Maria Lugones, and we also drew from de Souza Santos in the way we approach this community and the way we wanted, in a way, to collect data, but as we say in the academic world, but we wanted to learn from this community as well, learn with them, not be there to investigate or to observe them, but to have a subject-to-subject relationship. So just for me to tell you about the context, so Ocupação Esperança was born, so this community is called Esperança is hope in English. It was born, so they started this occupation in 2013 in São Paulo, in a peripheral area of the city. There were 1,000 families at the beginning, and some of the families went away, but many families remained. So around 500 had remained at the time of the study. The site was an abandoned site, so that's why it's called ocupação. So it's not something that you just invade, but it's an occupation, meaning that people who go there, they take care of the place. They have rules to obey, let's say, between themselves, that they not, there's not a, let's say, there are some rules that they have to obey, for example, not to sell the houses, even if they are precarious, and other rules, other, let's say, rules, other guidelines that they have there. So the site was abandoned, and in September 2016, the occupation caught fire, but resisted. So the cause of the fire were not really known, but they resisted, and even it prompted among the inhabitants even more solidarity. So to go to Ocupação Esperança is not an easy task. So when I could do the ethnographic study there, it was around 2 years ago, and it doesn't appear in any map. So we had to follow the Dakar to an industrial company there to be able to have access to the community. The data collection was done in 2019, the first one. The second we'll do in place at the end of the year, but we could remain in contact with the inhabitants after this first visit. There was a warm reception, and it's not an easy, let's say, place to go at the beginning, given our positionality. So we thought about also who are we, and how we can position ourselves in relation to the inhabitants. And we've been learning a lot with this relationship since then. Not to be paternalistic ourselves, because we have to be careful with that as well. There was some anxiety, of course, of going there, because many people in Brazil would be afraid of going there or even elsewhere, but there was also a lot of affection and in the field work. So the way that I could approach, in fact, the inhabitants was through rodas de conversa, which means circles of talking, trying to have this subject to subject relationship. So one of the community leaders said, "No, don't come observe, come and stay, to stick, to colar," as we say in Portuguese. Vem e cola, that's what she said for those who understand Portuguese. So the primary data was translated from Brazilian Portuguese to English, and we also had a lot of collection of secondary data, press articles, history books, and legal documents about communities, favelas in Brazil specifically as well. The methodology was the colonial feminist approach. We were very aware, tried to be as aware as we could of the colonial difference and our positionality, since we were crossing this abyssal line that Yuliya mentioned, right? This line where people do not have really rights, as we have above the abyssal line.
Well, they don't have to quote Hannah, they don't have the rights to have rights. So this is how she described the refugees, but this is also how you can describe people living below the abyssal line.
Yes, and since we just, let's say, Yuliya just covered, and then we started studying this feminist community, it seemed to us as a very fruitful, critical case. The data analysis was composed of retroductive reasoning techniques, interaction between data and theory. We used the grounded theory methods combined with some abductive approaches, but we really wanted to, let's say, to be as loyal as possible to these epistemologies of the South that prompted us to do another study on the subject, by the way. So I would let Yuliya explain the data code and the model.
Yeah, we coded the data. Of course, the data that was codable because we had to meet some expected standards of the journal where it was submitted. But just one more word about epistemologies of the South. So basically, the main premise of the epistemologies of the South is that you don't have to find a Western equivalent of something that you a specific term, or something that is the practice that exists that can be unique to the place. You don't have to impose on it some kind of a westernized interpretation. So, which means that very often you have to leave the terms, and you can try and describe the praxis, etc. But you have to be very careful not kind of trying to find a Western equivalent of it. So, and for example, and some of the practices that we identified of this community building, we didn't translate them. So we kept them as it is, and then we gave a very rich, thick descriptions of what they constituted, etc. So, I mean, you can see how the data was coded as well. So first we find out, we try to understand and theoretically access how colonial production of radical exclusion through what kind of how it was produced, this colonial exclusion. So looking at what was the experience of this exclusion, then how from the exclusion the emergence of collective political actorhood was initiated, and finally from the construction of the political actorhood we arrive at the specific practices of resistance to exclusion. So from the vulnerabilities that were created, we arrive into some kind of a fomentation of agency and the actorhood that ends up being enacted in some very concrete actions of resistance. We can go further, Camilla, because we don't have a lot of time. Right?
Yes. So just to
yes, we can.
I was just going to say
this.
you could talk all afternoon because it's super interesting.
Yeah, exactly. You can skip a data interpretation.
Okay,
Camilla, we don't have to. So findings, we organize findings in 3 parts. You have, so as I said, colonial production of radical exclusion, fomentation of resistant subjectivity to radical exclusion, and emergence of collective political actorhood. So you start from how people become, well, the resistant subjectivities, as they call in Lugones, but then how these resistant subjectivities, how they come together and make their presence to be counted with, and how they come together as a community at the end of the day in the interaction with the external structures of domination. So, and we identify different practices behind this fomentation of the community actorhood, political actorhood. So practices of communal care, mutirao and ocupação, impossible to translate. You'll have to read the paper, but here you have some of the pictures demonstrating them. Moving back. Moving forward, sorry.
Yes,
Camilla.
sorry. I think I made it smaller,
yeah.
Yes.
So coalition building by inviting in different groups of...
Yes, sorry, I have to make it bigger. Yes, sorry. Okay.
Don't have to make it bigger, so now we don't see anything.
Okay, I will try to share my screen again. Okay. Are you seeing it?
Yes. So next slide, the 17.
Okay. So next slide. Yes.
So the coalition building, meaning that they build a coalition with the activists and the different social groups outside of their community. So fomenting their political actorhood and also kind of sharing the best practice, so to speak. Camilla?
Yes, and finally, I don't know what happened to the presentation, but maybe we should go to the contributions.
Okay, well,
yeah. Mm-hmm. So the contributions are that's drawing from the colonial feminists. We try to elucidate these alternative socialities, right? The subjectivities that nobody noticed in traditional organizations of struggle. Struggle is a concept which is core for the epistemology of the South, how people live in struggle and how this struggle can be valued. We try also to expand the theorization of this concept of abyssal line, as one of the core ideas in this decolonial feminist theory by Lugones and we also follow de Souza Santos, demonstrating that the radical exclusion espouses, let's say, is together with this paradox of this invisibility, visible invisibility. And our studies also offers this deconstruction of the abyssal line and this intersectionality of form of othering, right? So gender, race, and age, and also the colonial difference intersect. Maybe Yuliya has more to say, or maybe we should discuss with the questions.
Well, right now the paper it's been revised, it's been resubmitted. We'll see. This is currently in the organizational studies, yes. But I think one of the motivations that we have is that we really want to initiate the conversation about how organizational scholars can learn from these sides of resistance. So visible invisibility, the paradoxes mean that we know that 80% of the population lives in the slums, but somehow we don't really see these places as the ones that can give us new learning about social justice and can set up an example. So we treat this knowledge as irrelevant, as invisible, although this is very much in front of us.
Great,
thank you everyone.
Fantastic. It's such an interesting paper and an interesting presentation. So much we can learn from all aspects. That the methodology as well is super interesting, and seeing how you actually got there and what everything looks like. Maybe I'll pass directly over to the floor if anyone has questions or comments. Céline and I can give you feedback anytime you like. Anybody, any reflections, responses, thoughts on that?
I have a clarification question. You talk about authentic forms of organizing. What is behind the word authentic? What is it exactly?
Alternative. So alternative forms of organizing are the forms of organizing that for which you don't yet have a term. It's not a form of organizing that is an NGO. It's not a form of organizing that is a kind of a, for example, what is it called? For state organization, etc. So it's a community, it's an organization because they provide services for themselves, etc. But we don't have a name for it. So,
in fact, Céline, what they by talking to the leaders and inhabitants, they talk a lot about direct struggle. So since they do not believe that the governments can help them or other, let's say, institutions, they do a direct struggle. So the name ocupação is very linked to this. They occupy a land. You know, when we see this movement, Occupy Wall Street, and ocupação is this, is when you occupy a land, but you don't occupy like randomly. You occupy with an objective to say that we just see to build something there, build a community, and to take care of this community to foster and not like just invading a land or something. So it has to do
these
with
are not
this,
like squads or, this is why it's impossible to translate it. It's ocupação, it's redefining the social purpose of land, that everybody has a right to housing. We don't want this housing to be provided. We can actually build our own housing. So, and we can build our own housing relying on the indigenous forms of organizing it for us, like mutirão. This is one of these forms where you have just exchange of services, etc. So we don't have to rely on monetary exchange. We don't have to rely on this, capitalist frame of relationship. And this is quite fascinating.
Yes, mutirão, for example, which is a term we use. It's that Yuliya mentions, is like, it's a word that comes from indigenous knowledge and means that everybody goes together and they build a house together, or they make there's a collective kitchen there in the community. So at the beginning of the ocupação, people share the food so they could, everybody could eat, which is already something very important for people who were there, mainly because most of them come from the northeast of Brazil. They go to the big cities like São Paulo, and at one point their rents are so expensive that they don't have a way to pay anymore. So they go to these ocupações, and together they occupy a land which is not used for years. So that's very interesting. There are many ocupações in Brazil and around the world, but especially in countries like Brazil where inequalities are so high. Yeah.
Can I ask something? Oh, sorry.
Asaf, go ahead.
Just I wonder if you can turn off the screen share so it's easy to see everyone.
Yes, yes.
And I did have a question. It might come from just...
Sorry. I'll try to do what you asked. Just, okay. Just increasing the Zoom, sorry. And I'll stop. I'm not very good with technology, so I'm trying to. Okay.
It's the share screen button below in the middle, I think. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks it's really interesting, and I also enjoyed and appreciated reading your paper yesterday, and thanks for the presentation, made it even clearer. And I wanted to know, from what I understood, especially Yuliya, at the end you mentioned about organizations and even maybe governments drawing on the unique knowledge and ways of being from those communities. However, the terms, and again, that might be a cultural misunderstanding, but the terms occupation and resistance, I wonder how do you suggest that, or know that cooperation can be made when you resist government, you resist the current structures, and it seems to me like two separate worlds. that maybe that's part of the dissonance there.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So it's not so. What exactly you're resisting? You're resisting your marginalization. So it's not like you're an anarchist. Although there is a kind of a nice romantic anarchy moment in this. So what does it mean? So you don't want to be homeless. You resist being forced into the state of homelessness. This is why they don't like to be even called favelas. So this is ocupação. It's a term that defines this kind of a alternative way of living together, and in this togetherness not being marginalized, meaning then when we want to keep our presence on this land, we can come as a community, calling ourselves Community Esperança, to the municipality and demand that their right to this housing that we build ourselves will be recognized, that will be, for example, that the garbage will get collected and things like this. So resistance here is resistance to this condition of being marginalized, of being made invisible as a human being, because you cannot, you're not useful for the capitalist system. You cannot be consumer, you cannot be a house owner, therefore, and how can you do it? So you can do it conventionally, politically. You can go and you can, because it's a democracy, you can go and you can vote for the politicians that will go to the parliament and would your representatives. And for example, would try and lobby for, put forward the policies that where you will receive the state, the help from the state in the form of different unemployment benefits, etc. But it's not going to work in the country like Brazil. So for a number of reasons, this is a very different type of historical context. A huge number of people is in the informal economy. A lot of them do not receive pensions, etc. So all these traditional ways of intervening and dealing with the marginalization will not work there. So which also means that we actually have to understand what is that people do themselves organically through this grassroots organizing to create this resistance to marginalization. And yes, they occupy, but it's ocupação. You say it's impossible to, you cannot find an equivalent of this action in the Western context. I hope it answered your question.
Okay, thank you.
So we're going to really tight for time. Maybe if there are other burning questions, we can use the chat or send by email, just to make sure that we have enough time to give feedback to all of the papers. So thank you, Camilla and Yuliya. Thank you so much.
Muito obrigada. Unfortunately, I'm in Brussels. I have to teach, I have to run, but it's been a very short but huge pleasure of spending this hour in your company.
Thanks for joining us.
And Céline, everybody's sending you hugs and kisses here, by the way.
Okay, fantastic. So yeah, keep the questions coming in the chat. Camilla's going to stick around, I think, so we can deal with any of those in the chat. That would be great. And so then we'll move to Ariadne and jump in with your paper, if you're ready to go.
Okay, hi guys. I'm really glad to be here. It's my first presentation in English, so I hope you understand me well. Thank you for being here. So I'm gonna just share my piece. Are you seeing something? Hello?
Yes, we can see.
Yeah, we can see it. Yeah, it's clear.
Yeah, okay. So let's do it. So my paper, my research is about bioconstruction. And my goal was to see a form of introduce bioconstruction as a popular housing alternative in a city in Brazil. Start with the city and see if it is possible to introduce in the urban planning, the housing planning of the city. So for a little context, we know that even with effort, some aimed at sustainable development, climate change and social disparities continue to aggravate, right? Causing society to seek for post-development forms as alternatives for this current hegemonic model we live in. And we can see that the deficit of housing is a really big issue in urban areas under this model, and here in Brazil particularly. So from this, we can see locally based movements expanding and experimenting and producing in a network under the name of eco-socioeconomies here that promote this post-development. So relevant alternative movements to urban development present new ways of thinking about space to become more sustainable, like slow cities, eco-villages, eco-neighborhoods. So entering in the field of housing as a part of an urban matter, the housing deficit in Brazil is really critical. And the scenarios actually presents a set of factors characterized by the current economic system, like social economy, the cost of housing. So therefore, it is urgent to think of alternatives to remedy this deficit while opportunities like bioconstructions are observed. A sustainable city needs to presuppose a cohesive relationship between urban space and the environment it is in. So it is necessary to work also together with public power in planning and public policies. And within alternative models such as slow cities and eco-villages, we have principles that consider housing as a fundamental component of the environment that promote quality of life. So bioconstruction actually is a form of healthy housing that can promote this quality of life, taking account the dimensions of sustainability. Bioconstruction actually is characterized as a low-cost housing constructions that uses alternative vernaculars and recycled materials available in the surroundings of the place that it is being built, with techniques that significantly reduce the environmental impact, right, and the externalities generated in the construction processes. And as Yuliya and Camilla says, it can involve the community and the owner of the house in the construction through the self-building. So, as I said, my goal with this research was to demonstrate some possibility of including bioconstruction in popular housing planning of a city as an alternative for the development of a more sustainable city, and to bring some something to diminish the deficit housing. And for this purpose, the city of Morretes, located in the south of Brazil, was selected. And for that, interviews and survey research were carried out. So the interviews and the survey were made with the city secretaries that were linked to housing and environment planning. And interviews also were made with residents that lived in precarious conditions in settlements or occupations, and as the girl said earlier. In addition to the interviews, a survey was sent to the secretariats to understand the ongoing actions related to sustainability and understand the city's potential to adhere to new actions. So for the elaboration of the survey, two analysis criteria were used. I took based in the flower of principles of eco-villages and criteria framed to become a slow city. So I joined them and made a new board, a new criteria board. So the first level was subdivided in some 7 great criteria, all related to governance and sustainability. And from the 7 criteria, the level 2, it was subdivided in 42 small criteria. And from this, in the side of this board, to answer, right, for those, I divided in 2 stages for them to answer. So the first one, in which it aims to answer whether there were actions about it already, containing closed questions with 3 nominal variables, yes, no, and I don't know, and open comments. And the second stage is 6 answers related to how important the secretaries considered the city to have these initiatives. And the degree of importance self-perceived was assessed using the Likert scale, 5 levels of perceive, with the possibility to open comments also. Also, the 5 residents of 5 different dwellings in an urban settlement occupation were also interviewed, and the settlement was amongst the 7 most precarious settlements in the city, located in an areas that needs special attentions because it suffers constant flooding, causing degradation in the housing and the surroundings. So, gathering all the information, giving in response to the survey questionnaire and interviews from the secretaries, there are 43% of actions carried out by the city already related to slow cities and eco-villages. It is really nice to say here that the city, she likes to consider herself like a prototype for sustainable development. And they accept a lot of ideas in this way, and they are trying to move with its limits, right? And according to the interviewees, also there are projects planned for the city related to slow cities and eco-village criteria. 83% of them related to agricultural, touristics, and artisanal policies. And regarding the importance of existing relative initiatives in the city, 80% of the responses were scored as very important. Now we see these as very important things to look forward. Despite the need to carry out in a more deep research and openness to the use of bioconstruction by the residents also that I interviewed of the settlement was found, and they were open to bioconstruction housing also. Furthermore, they're open to the inclusion of elements also of slow cities and eco-villages around their homes, especially elements related to infrastructures such as sustainable sanitation, rainwater recovery, garbage composting, as well as food production elements such as community gardens. Actually, a very interesting result also, because I didn't put here, is that from the 5 families that I interviewed, 4 of them already knew about bioconstruction and some forms of eco-villas there. Okay. So from the conclusions I had with this, it is possible to conclude that are important characteristics of slow cities and eco-villages in the city, as well as projects to be implemented in the intention to expand the diversity of projects in connection with these two movements, as slow cities and eco-villages. Since we saw the answers of the secretaries saying, Morretes is the prototype city of sustainability. And regarding the feasibility of including bioconstructions as an alternative in housing projects, studies really need to be carried out on which bioconstructions materials and techniques would be suitable for the city, since it has like a fragile ecosystems. It rains a lot, it is inserted in the environmental reserve, and therefore should this all cause no negative impact, right? And it is also necessary that the city to proceed with bioconstruction projects also find financial alternatives, because we have a financial federal systems that imposes some kinds of construction techniques. And even if the cities want to finance this, it is not, they don't have much money, so I think they need to find financing alternatives, and encouraging, of course, self-construction and articulating partnerships can be an option to make the inclusion of bioconstructions for popular housing independent of these financial systems. So that was it.
Great, thank you, Ariadne. Great, thanks for the presentation. Super interesting.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, there's lots of ideas, lots of thoughts there. Any reactions or questions before?
Maybe I can start if you don't mind.
We just have a couple of minutes for questions. Sorry.
Okay, I'll ask two questions very shortly. I really enjoyed reading your paper because I didn't know anything about your topic, so it was really interesting. Now, two questions that I was wondering, and make it short, is what is the research question? I was wondering, what do you want to tell us? Wasn't clear to me. And then I was wondering, you have all those interviews, but you haven't yet used them. So I was wondering, at least I don't see it in the paper, how are you going to use them? What can we learn through the interviews, which could complement the surveys?
So actually, this paper came from a bigger study that I'm doing for the master for ISAE, a master degree. And I think I just didn't resumed it well for you. So the main work that I was doing was to first talk about bioconstruction as an alternative for conventional construction in popular housing, because in Brazil we have these programs to build housing for the poor that is like 1 in a million, let's say. And my goal was to bring bioconstruction as an additional thing to build this popular housing, right? To make it easier, or to make it more self-constructible or more independent to the people who are being more independent to build. And the second thing that I think we also need to get the public power into this, to help with this, and to make it more like, I don't know how to say it, like more to validate it and to reproduce it in a bigger scale. So this was the two main objectives. And for that, and also I started to understand that bioconstruction is a part of something bigger. It's not only a house that you build, but a house that you have other things to think, like the rainwater and the electricity. You have to introduce it in the environment, not only with the eco-friendly materials, but also to integrate it in the city. So I thought to bring the slow cities and the eco-villas to this also. I hope I can I answered your question, but you can ask me more. No,
thank you very much. Maybe just like Asaf said earlier, maybe it's nice if you stop sharing your screen and we can see each other.
Okay.
Just small comments.
Let me see if I can do this.
So I've also put a question in the chat there, more of a conceptual question related to whether there are actual, sort of conceptual differences between this idea of eco-village or slow cities. And you also mentioned degrowth in the paper. So do all of these things follow on from that degrowth theory? I don't have to respond now, but maybe it's something to think about from a conceptual perspective. Do they come from the same place? Do they have the same criteria, or are they fundamentally different somehow? So that could be a piece to look at.
Actually, Slow City, you can see it. It was actually formed in Italy. It was concepted in Italy first from the slow food movement, and they expanded with the mayors and started to see how they could be more sustainable in other ways in the city, not just as a traditional and to actually preserve the food, the traditions and stuff, and to bring it more to the city. So they created like a big criteria thing for cities, and to bring elements of sustainability referred in quality of life and agriculture and building and everything to the city planning, right? So Slow City is like almost like a movement. Let's say that its premises is quality of life and well-being, respect for the environment, and equity between the dimensions of sustainability or in a sustainable urban planning. So we can say it is already introduced with the public power, right? The public matter. And the eco-villages, they are a movement that is a model actually of intentional communities that are not linked with the public power, but they are rising and making a huge difference in bringing sustainable development for cities. You can say they can be little communities like neighbors in there, and their principles, they actually seek sustainability to the development of appropriate technologies in their territories based on local practices that aim to mitigate social challenges and environmental costs. So I think they both have really important elements that we can use in a city, in a public policy to instigate sustainable development.
Interesting, the different concepts and how they could work together, maybe in slightly different ways. I see there's another question in the chat there, but I'm going to suggest that we move on to we've missed our bathroom break, but we move on to the next paper just to make sure that everyone can get some feedback before the next session. But thank you, Ariadne, for your presentation. Well done in English. It was clear, and it's a really interesting topic. So
Thank you all for this, and let's thank you.
Maybe
Bye,
we can
guys.
encourage. I mean, if you have more questions, you can post it in the chat, and then you know, it's always
I can answer
helpful.
that also.
Yeah, please use the
you
chat,
take it with you, and
yeah, I think you have each other's emails as well, so please feel free to follow up on anything. Yeah.
For sure.
Okay, so the next paper is the paper on lessons from grassroots innovations. Nigel, over to you.
Thank you very, very much. And yeah, again, thanks for having me. It's good to be here. I'm really enjoying all the papers up to now, so no pressure. I'll just get my screen going so you can all see that. So look, the paper is obviously on grassroots innovation, or lessons of grassroots innovation here in Australia. And look, it's an area that I've always been really fascinated with. So it was really nice to be able to dig in and do some research. So basically what we're going to look at in a few minutes is a bit of background on the benefits of grassroots innovation for broader communities and for government and mainstream bodies. So obviously, there are many definitions of grassroots innovation, but in essence, it's local communities. And to disperse grassroots innovation on a much broader context is a really interesting proposition. And to look at that, obviously, through the methodology were two Australian case examples, which we'll touch upon. And finally, considerations for how to integrate grassroots innovation and mainstream communities for the benefit of sustainable solutions. So grassroots innovation, as I said, has many different definitions. And part of the reason for that, it's very situational. It will vary from community to community, from situation to situation. One commonality, though, is it's bottom up. And what that means is grassroots innovation happens, obviously, in the local community. It happens on the front line, so to speak, and then it disperses up. Whereas mainstream innovation or government and mainstream policies from mainstream bodies tends to have a top-down approach. So there's an objective or a mandate or a remit, and it's pushed down, it cascaded down into the community. So they happen in opposite directions, which creates obviously different dynamics and also creates a few challenges along the way as well. Grassroots innovation obviously has a number of key benefits to sustainability, adaptability, shared learning. But in essence, what we see is there's two key benefits. One being its ability to be fit for purpose. In other words, address specific problems on a local community level. So the innovation that occurs is specific for a problem to a specific community, and that will vary from community to community, culture to culture, location to location. The other really key benefit of grassroots innovation, which came through, was this idea of elevated stakeholder engagement. Because it's bottom up, because it's located in communities generally, the communities tend to get involved. So there's much greater stakeholder engagement, and that has benefits. Firstly, it allows for shared knowledge. It also allows for the evolution and dissemination of innovation, because as it's transferred from community to community by those stakeholders, it tends to adapt on its grassroots nature. So if we can take those things and transpose them into a framework for government and mainstream bodies to adopt, we get the benefits of grassroots innovation on a much broader basis. There's challenges, however, with that. The first one, though, is having a top-down approach to try and instigate grassroots innovation actually inhibits and impedes it. And that's because it constricts it. And also, if you think about top-down remits, often there are equity holders. And what that does is creates a thing called funding bias. And so the innovation isn't as fit for purpose because there are other considerations that need to be taken into account. So let's just have a look at two Australian case studies. This was in addition to other research and peer-reviewed research that was looked at. The first is a not-for-profit organisation in the centre of Australia at a town called Alice Springs, right in the middle, called Desert Knowledge Australia. Now, what what Desert Knowledge Australia does, it's a conduit for Indigenous knowledge. So they don't focus on artifacts, they don't focus on hard innovation. The focus is on soft innovation. How do they create frameworks for local and Indigenous knowledge to be shared for the benefit of not just a community, but many regional and remote communities? And in doing so, that knowledge is then taken up to the broader community as well. The other case example that I looked at is another small not-for-profit business or organisation, I should say, in Alice Springs, once again, the centre of Australia, called Purple House. What they do is basically take dialysis machines, medical machines for kidney failure, to remote communities for the Indigenous population. Now, the challenge for Indigenous communities, if one of the elders or one of the community does become sick with kidney disease, to take them off their country, away from their culture, and place them into a mainstream hospital in a major city is incredibly disruptive, can be impeding to their recovery, and also, of course, not damaging so much, but has a negative impact on the community. So what Purple House does, they take the medical equipment to the remote areas. Now, the reason this is a really cool case study is because they're solving a local problem using mainstream mechanisms. For example, the equipment they use is mainstream equipment. They're self-funded, and they do so through mainstream mechanisms as well, such as charity fundraisers, selling Indigenous art. They also sell, the middle picture at the bottom here, you can see is Indigenous medicine, what they call bush medicine, which again supports local communities in sharing their knowledge and in earning income, but they do so through mainstream mechanisms of online sales, through the web. So Purple House is a great example of an organisation that has blended both grassroots innovation, really community focused. They actually say that their bosses are their patients and the families. So they're very focused on local community, but they're using broader mainstream bodies and mechanisms to support it and make it thrive. So a few lessons in that. So what are the considerations in bringing grassroots innovation and its benefits to mainstream? If you're a government or you're an organisation, how can you leverage the benefits of of grassroots, I should say? The first one is a greater understanding from both sides of the fence. In other words, for mainstream bodies, for government, to really understand how grassroots innovation works, its nuances, and to get really empathetic and put themselves in the shoes of the local communities who are solving these problems and who are innovating. But on the other hand, grassroots innovators need to also understand the nuances, the expectations of mainstream organizations and governments as well. And once we get that understanding happening, we can create a mechanism that is flexible both bottom up and top down. In doing that, we need to create cognitive frameworks so we learn from each other, we share that knowledge, both going up and coming back down. And ultimately, we need to develop frameworks that are bottom up, which is where the grassroots innovation comes from, but also top down. So it's a symbiotic or a blending of the two worlds. So in conclusion, if we're going to meld grassroots innovation and all of its benefits for mainstream, using mainstream policies and procedures so that governments, organizations can use grassroots innovation in its essence for the benefits of broader communities and sustainable solutions. What we need to do is look at or rethink conventional models. So rather than a linear top down or linear bottom up, we need to blend the two together. And that's when we start to see the benefits, which are mutually beneficial for all. I will leave it there. So thank you very much.
Brilliant, thank you. Super interesting. Thanks for the presentation. Yeah, it's a really fascinating topic, this idea of the grassroots innovation coming from the bottom up and then the top down and trying somehow to meet in the middle. So congratulations on what you've done so far. It's super interesting. Maybe just a comment from my part. We've been doing a bit of work on sustainability-oriented innovations and trying to set that kind of literature within the systems, the social and ecological systems literature, because we talk a lot about bottom-up and top-down, but trying to situate it more into these, into the systems, it kind of moves us away from this up and down, but it's more kind of outside in and inside out. So can we bring in these community stakeholders inside the innovation process, almost like bring the system into the innovation process in order to make sure that the consequences of the innovation, perhaps even unintended consequences, have already kind of been tested with that wider system through the innovation. So just a comment, not really a question, but maybe that has some link to this idea of top down, bottom up.
I find that's really interesting, actually, because one of the things you often hear very general statement, but one of the things I've heard is when you're talking to those in local communities is they don't see themselves as innovative. And it's often, as soon as we say innovation, we destroy the very essence of it. And as soon as Jennifer, it's really interesting, by just talking about bottom up, top down, we're almost losing that centerpiece that you spoke of, the inside out piece. So that's it's very interesting. Thanks.
Good. Any questions, comments from the others here?
Just found one thing, Jennifer and Nigel, the link between the paper that was presented earlier around the women elders or women, the feminist women, and how they created those organic communities. Nigel, I don't know whether you found the same when you spent quite a bit of time out in the Northern Territory, that the women have a similar role of self-determination in those communities as well.
Well, yes, extraordinarily so. And again, it varies from community to community. So, for example, there's another organisation in remote Australia called Gyampi Weavers, and it's Gyampi is a form of weaving that's art. So they tell the stories of in Australia we call it stories of the dreaming, but they tell stories to pass down from generation to generation. But they do it in weaving not just of baskets, but of, for example, a kangaroo or an emu or an animal. So they are the custodians of their culture and their history, and they actually do it through weaving. What's interesting with Gyampi is it's almost, I've got to say this nicely, but it's an exclusive women's group within the community. It's women's business, so to speak. And I find that fascinating, Jed, actually. We're going off on a tangent, but hey.
No, I see a strong link between those two communities and the role of women in terms of taking them out of poverty, or as it was mentioned by Camilla, I think it was, that the resistance to the situation that they were in, but that resistance is actually about getting the community out of poverty and taking care of everything from the nurturing side through to building, literally building the community.
And it's one of the things Purple House do with their bush medicine. That is brought into Purple House from remote communities. And so they're also, not only are they working in the sphere of healthcare, but they're also economically helping those communities, and also helping the communities bond and work together more and more.
Thanks a lot, Nigel, for the paper and the presentation. Really interesting. I really enjoyed reading this paper. And it's also raised the question I didn't have time to ask with Camilla and Yuliya. It was, this relationship between those what Camilla and Yuliya calls alternative forms of organizing and the mainstream or conventional organizations. And it's exactly what you are doing. So that's really interesting. While reading the paper, I wanted to know more about the cases. There was not enough, so I would like to go more into the cases and how those cases also leads you to your results. but I want to know more to get into it, and what is it exactly, and what can you get out of it to come up with a framework. So I missed this link here, and yeah, but really, I think you have two rich cases, and you could really, I think you could expand it and go more into, dive into it more.
Céline, thank you. And that is a challenge I would love to accept, because it's fascinating, and we learn through stories. So I think the more case studies we look at, or case examples to look at, the more will be revealed and the more we can learn from. So yeah, thank you.
And just a comment, sorry to, since you mentioned our work, Céline and Nigel, is really interesting. It's the epistemologies of the South that we were referring to in our work have a lot to do with what you were saying about this knowledge that we don't necessarily value in scientific paradigm that we live in, but that we can learn with. So this is something that we're really seeing in the community study that we did in São Paulo, how to learn with this other forms of knowledge, other ways of knowing that we don't value in academia. So I think in our work, I see a lot of this desert knowledge, this indigenous knowledge, how we call it, but the idea of these epistemologies and the South, it doesn't mean only the South geographically, right? It means the South, let's say in a broader manner, right? Not only Brazil or even Australia could be considered, there are Souths in Australia, right? So this, it's really called my attention of the synergies that we see between our works. Yeah, there's a comment, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Camilla. And I'm not sure if it was you or it was somebody else who, I forget where it was, someone said about being less productive. And so one of the questions, and you may be able to answer this, is one of the things I think with grassroots innovation is one of the reasons it is so effective within local communities is they sit with the problem longer, and they often don't rush to solve it. So in a weird way, it kind of matches up what, I think it was yourself, I can't remember, about being less productive, because that actually gives you time to think and to really understand. And then when you do solve that particular problem, be it a water causeway or whatever that is, often the solution is clearer because we haven't rushed. And I think often in mainstream, especially in the Western part of the world, we're constantly rushing to come up with the next solution and then the next solution and then the next solution. And so, if you go back to what Einstein said, if I had 60 minutes to solve a problem, I'd spend 50 minutes on the problem. I actually think that, and I'd love to do more research in it, to be honest, but, I think that's a real benchmark or hallmark of grassroots innovation. And I saw that in the other presentations, and please correct me if I'm wrong with that one, but I think it's a really important point.
I mean, it's really interesting what you are saying, and something that something we think a lot. I mean, that makes me think about our discussions we have at Audencia with Jennifer, Camilla, and others about in teaching, how do we bring that rather than rushing or pushing the students to go immediately to the solution, but as you said, sit longer with the problem before they can come with any potential solutions.
Yeah. So go on, Suzanne.
I was just wondering there, are we imposing also our Western view of logics into that discussion? So, talking about production and time and efficiency and even innovation, the word innovation, in these communities, is that the logic or the vocabulary that they would be using? Probably not. So, are we still trying to fashion the other into our way of thinking? And I'd like to think about the sort of terminology we use there even.
I think that's really important. And I actually think it works both ways in a weird sort of way. So Purple House, for example, is 100% Indigenous owned by the traditional custodians of the land. However, the CEO of Purple House, because it has to be sustainably viable economically as a not-for-profit business, so to speak, is an English lady, not an Indigenous person at all. But when you talk with her, it's all about, hey, come over at 4 o'clock because we're throwing a kangaroo tail into the ground and you can eat with us. And she's almost a conduit of that language to the traditional language. I don't know how many languages there are in Australian Indigenous culture. It's well over 60. I don't know if you know, Geraldine, it's a lot. But interestingly, I was talking to an Indigenous elder who actually she was talking to me about how Indigenous Australians are the first innovators. So it's interesting how, you know, a lot of the Indigenous knowledge is using our language in order to help us understand. So it's a really interesting conundrum, which I've never thought about actually, is that, again, it's a bit of a two-way conversation maybe.
It's really striking how rich these papers are actually, just the different conversations that are coming up, the context that we're looking at, super, super interesting. But I'm going to fall back on my rushed Western ways and say that we're going to have to attack paper number 5 and to make sure that we have enough time for feedback. So that's going to be Arundam, Ishwa. Perhaps if you can keep your presentation to the minimum, and then we'll have more time to discuss and comment on your work, that would be great. Thank you so much, Nigel, for the presentation. Super interesting.
Thanks, Jennifer. Am I audible? Wonderful. So like Jennifer said, so in the interest of time, I will keep the presentation short. Here we go. Is it visible now? Clearly visible?
Yep, that's fine. Go ahead.
Very good. So, so hello to everybody. I'm very happy that Arundam is also here. So we wrote the paper together with Professor Manfred Kirchgard, who's unfortunately not able to be here with us today. So this was the track. The track was role of government in enabling sustainable business incubation, and this is broadly what we are looking at. So this is something that I've dealt with in my professional life for some time, essentially looking at how do small businesses, especially businesses that are at the base of the economic pyramid, how do we help them grow? How do we help them find sustainable markets and essentially address their supply side issues, which they tend to have. So the context is essentially, in the literature, so the role of entrepreneurship is in enhancing broad economy level competitiveness is broadly accepted, meaning competitiveness, so defined as a function of productivity of working age individuals in the population. So the competitiveness literature essentially divides or classifies countries. So this is at country level and classifies them in 3 different types of economies. So one is factor-based, which is essentially either agriculture or digging things out of the ground and exporting them, or, as they are, so commodities. Then you have efficiency-based economies, which are essentially based on sectors which are fairly sophisticated and are looking at, so essentially benefiting from economies of scope and scale. So if you look at the automotive sector in certain countries, or say garments in certain countries and so on. So China would be an example of a efficiency-based economy in large parts. Then you have the sophistication-based economies, which are essentially driven by knowledge. They're essentially driven by design, creativity, high tech, innovation, and so on and so forth. So the countries in Scandinavia, Switzerland, etc. So these would be countries in the United States and so on, which would be under this classification, which is essentially used by the World Economic Forum and largely is based on the work of Michael Porter. So there, with these countries, then each of these, so in factor-based economies, entrepreneurship tends to be high. The numbers, because there are no alternatives, so there's very few jobs that are available, and therefore people tend to start their own businesses. In efficiency-based economies, that trend goes down because you have lots of jobs, you have very large companies, so there is scale. So therefore, entrepreneurship in general is lower. Then again, in sophistication-based economies, then you have again there's an uptake in terms of the kinds of companies that get founded. And these are essentially based on innovation, so high-tech innovation and so on. Then again, there's another stream of literature which essentially talks about whether increasing the number of new firms and new founders has, is a desirable goal of economic strategy. And the evidence seems to be that it depends on the kind of entrepreneurship, the entrepreneurial experience, and what type of innovation is this new enterprise going after. So is it replicative, or is it, is it just doing more of what is already out there, or doing new things in new ways? India in general, which is the company, the country that we focused on, tends to be, even from competitiveness angle, tends to be a bit of a paradox. So you've got parts of the Indian economy which are largely factor-based, so that's the agriculture and mining, extraction, and so on. Then you've got efficiency. So India is already the world's largest producer of vaccines. It's the largest producer of several types of chemicals. It's a large producer of automotives and so on. So the largest producer of two-wheel motorbikes, for instance, in the world, and exporter. So we have a significant part of the economy which is efficiency-based, can be classified as such. And then you have pockets in India like Bangalore or Hyderabad or Tirunelveli or the national capital region in Delhi and some Gurgaon, where Bangalore, for instance, is in the top 5 startup hotspots in the whole world. And I think India now has the 3rd or the 4th largest number of unicorns in the world, or something like that. So you have a real paradox in India. So you've got all of these different realities happening at the same time. So again, so the classification of enterprises themselves. So like we said, so whether creating new enterprises is a desirable goal of economic strategy depends also on the kind of enterprise. And the literature classifies enterprises into 2 types, so need-based and opportunity-based. Need is essentially where people don't have an alternate way of earning an income, and therefore are forced to go into, so it's essentially a push factor into starting their own businesses. And then you have the opportunity-based enterprises, where essentially the founder has a clear sense of what the outcome is, or has a clear sense of what the inputs are, or in general is willing to experiment, right? So that's broadly the 2 types. And this is something which is very important for a country like India, because we have such large numbers of need-based entrepreneurs. So we also have, so like I said, so we have a vibrant sector of opportunity-based entrepreneurs who are, creating jobs, sustainable jobs, etc. But then we have a really large number of need-based entrepreneurs. And the big question in our mind was essentially, what are the conditions? How can is there a way for us to transform need-based enterprises into opportunity-based enterprises? And this is what we've tried to do. So sorry, just a second, I went too fast. So we've looked at a series of programs that have been have been launched by the Indian government, both at the central level and at the state levels. And we see them in 2 different types of programs. One is essentially, again, when we are looking at the base of the economic pyramid. So one type of intervention where the ability of these founders and in people in general, the population in general, to consume and to demand better products and services, right? So one of them is direct benefit transfer. So India has this, it's called the Jan Dhan account. So these are digital accounts which have been created for millions of people, and the government is directly putting money into these accounts, and this is essentially creating an entire class of consumers. Then there is this pension. There's a for people at the base of the economic pyramid. There's accident insurance, universal healthcare, and so on. So we are saying that the types of things that debilitate founders at the base of the economic pyramid are somewhat mitigated because of these types of interventions, right? So the money that I would have put into, for instance, out-of-pocket expense to get a cataract operation or something else in healthcare, for instance, or somebody passes away and I don't, I lose income. or I just don't have the money to pay for things like energy, for food, for education, and so on. So these are the things that are kind of, are significantly being mitigated. And therefore, we think that these founders then have, more of a possibility to focus on the business itself. Then on the other side, on the left of your screen, what you will see is interventions where we think are enabling these founders to connect to mainstream markets better. So digital payments, for instance, right? India is already, I think, right in the top in terms of digitization of payments. We are way ahead of even countries like Japan and so on. Then you have something called the Mudra, and this is a loan scheme which has been started by government specifically for small businesses. And then you have a very large Skills India initiative also in the last few years. Again, some of these programs have been rehashed. They have been, there's a kind of booster versions of other things that were happening in the past. So we think these are the two sorts of innovation which is kind of happening within the ecosystem today, wherein there is this demand which is increasing and the ability therefore also to address that demand, right? So in this sort of ecosystem, we think is where need to opportunity can happen. Now this is a little jumbled here, possibly on your screens as well. But in general, the color scheme is going from red to blue to green. So the red is essentially why the debilitation occurs and what the kind of debilitation is. And we think there is a sort of extreme bricolage which is happening. Bricolage is essentially creating something from nothing, which is happening with these need-based entrepreneurs, which is based a little bit on some of the prior knowledge they might have from a vocation that they have. They've been in farming or blacksmithy or carpentry or whatever it is that they have some experience of, or working in construction as informal labor and so on. There's some support from government which comes in and NGOs and so on. But the problem is stunted growth, limited markets. There's very little market development. Many of them end up being even more indebted than they were, and essentially the cycle of poverty. These two types of interventions that I just talked about now, that's in the blue, and that's what we think will lead to some of these people, this is something that we still have to explore based on data, etc. What we think is happening is the causation element is kicking in first, wherein they are able to identify specific opportunities. Then effectuation, meaning that we have a set of means. Therefore, there might be several sets of outcomes that could result, and also the kind of bricolage where there's really this sort of creative innovativeness where you don't really have to think about where your next meal is coming from, how you're going to pay off that debt, etc., etc. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you all for your patience, and we look forward to questions. If Arindam is still here, he had a class, so he might have already left. Arindam is still here. Arindam, would you like to add something?
It's fine. Let's see if we have any questions from.
Sure. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ishwar. Congratulations. There's a lot of information on that screen. Great. Thank you. So I had maybe just one question to kick off. So you mentioned at the beginning that the role of entrepreneurship is enhancing, broader economic level competitiveness. It's talking about creating jobs. So my question was really, are you challenging that position, or are you supporting that that outline that you set out at the start? So,
sorry, I lost a little bit half the question. Could you?
So you talked at the beginning about how the role of entrepreneurship is to enhance the broader economy in terms of competitiveness and jobs. I was just wondering if your research wants to challenge that view, or if that was your starting point.
Right. So there's already research essentially which establishes that certain types of entrepreneurship. So the type of entrepreneurship. So like here, for instance, between need and opportunity. So the research already establishes that opportunity-based entrepreneurship leads to job creation, to sustainable wealth creation, innovation of new knowledge and intellectual property and so on and so forth. Whereas need-based entrepreneurship tends not to do any of that. So the research is fairly clear on that. So what we are essentially, we are not challenging the position that entrepreneurship can lead to sound outcomes. We are only following on from the research which already establishes that certain types of entrepreneurship is more, effective in creating those outcomes than others. Then we are saying in a country like India, where you have both of these occurring at the same time, is there a way for us to transition some of these need-based entrepreneurs to more opportunity-based entrepreneurship? Does that answer?
Okay. Yeah. So I guess my question was like, so you're not focusing on sort of social entrepreneurship here. It's purely economic outcome.
In our view, so when you talk about need-based entrepreneurs who come from such challenging environments, in general, the social is covered not, from the point of view of whether they are specifically looking for outcomes that are, social or environmentally driven, but then because they come from poverty and challenging environments, as long as they are running a business which is legal and productive and so on, it's within the ambit of sustainability in that sense. So the idea is that they will grow, they will create new jobs, they will create wealth and get themselves out of the cycle of poverty as well, while producing goods and services that are useful.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So we're not focusing on social entrepreneurship, as a specific animal.
Okay, great. Over to you guys. Any other questions, comments, reactions to the presentation?
A quick question on my side. I know it's already 30. We have to close the session. But in terms of data, where will you? It's not clear to me where you will get the data.
Right. So we've over the last several years, so we run this center and we run projects every year. So and we consult with government, etc. So we are in constant touch with these micro entrepreneurs, if you want to call them that, or So we have direct access to them. So this paper is, so far we've run several interviews. We've actually also run a series of interviews in Germany, because we wanted to compare. So Germany, interestingly, also has a large number of need-based entrepreneurs. It's kind of disproportionate to their level of development if you compare them to other OECD countries. But we didn't have the time to bring all of that into this paper, so we left it at this. But this is something
that was indeed one point that was not clear in the paper. There is something in Germany, but it wasn't. Okay, it's not yet there. No, but you want to do comparative analysis in a way. Okay, interesting.
Because Germany also has interesting lessons that they've done from the so-called Ich AG, to more entrepreneur, sort of opportunity-based entrepreneurship.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? Don't forget, we can keep in touch by email if there are further questions, thoughts, ideas. If anyone wants to share references, papers, or connect, where there were some similarities between papers, and I would encourage you to reach out and share in any way that you see fit. Any final comments? If not, I think that next session has already started. Maybe we should move into the next session. Thank you, Ishwar. Sorry that we haven't had as much time to explore some of the aspects of your paper. But thank you, everybody, for your presentations, for your comments, for your questions. It's been a really rich afternoon. So I hope you still have some energy left for the next session.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.